all the businesses, all the areas are drowning in data. And like I like to say, this is the year of the data, and we can just live that just by looking at our current scenario with the pandemic. Everything is data driven, from the vaccination, the vaccines, to studies, to the how a country is doing with the cases, with the mortality rate. Everything is just data in data visualization. But there is a catch for that. So this data is only good, is only as good as your ability to interpret and communicate its real meaning. And this is where Power BI comes into play and help us. So Microsoft Power BI is basically a collection of software services, apps, and connectors that work together. In turn, that kind of unrelated source of data you have into a coherent, visually immersive, and interactive, very interactive insights. So where your data is just as a simple workbook on Excel, or a cloud-based and on-premises, or more complex scenarios such as hybrid data warehouses, Power BI lets you easily connect to your data sources, clean and model that data without affecting, of course, the underlying source, and visualize or discover what's important about it, and share that with anyone or everyone you want. So this is the ecosystem where Power BI lives on. The first part, we have the data sources. So as I mentioned before, you can connect almost anything to Power BI, from, as you can see, SQL databases to NoSQL databases. So you have MariaDB, you can got MongoDB, you can work with Gremlin, which is a graph DB. You can also even have streaming data to your Power BI, SharePoint, Excel, anything you want. Even other cloud providers also you can connect. Then you got the content authoring, which is a part of the scripting, is the development part of Power BI. And you can, Power BI can interact with Python and R, as you can see there. You have something called DAX, which I'm going to explain later on. You can connect your GitHub and do some certain templates for your visuals. You can connect services such as Azure Synapse Studio. For those that doesn't know what Azure Synapse Studio is, in a nutshell, it's just an Azure service that you can pretty much grab all your data science project and put all that workload in one space and do transformation, loading, everything on your data. Then we have the content delivery, which is basically the visual part. And you can see we have a workspace, but how do we show that? We can show it as an embed content in a Teams app. You can do SharePoint online if you want. We have Power Apps also, you can embed that. We have custom applications, internal portals, public-facing portals, pretty much anything you want. And also can connect to certain services. Be my favorite ones, Azure Machine Learning, Azure Cognitive Services, and of course, Azure Synapse. Machine learning is just you can train your data and send it to Power BI, or Power BI send data and you train it. So that's pretty cool. And Azure Cognitive Services is just kind of like a bot service in Azure. Then we got I must say, my least favorite part, and also the most boring for me, which is the system administration. Is security is important as well, but it's boring for me. So there is Azure Active Directory. We have the security and compliance, all those sort of stuff. And as you can see, you can also connect to Office 365, which is now, of course, Microsoft 365. And that's basically the ecosystem of Power BI. But what are the parts and like the important concepts of Power BI, or the jargon of Power BI? So Power BI consists of a Microsoft operative system. Then we got the software as a service called Power BI service, and we got the mobile BI, well, the Power BI mobile. So all those three elements, desktop, the service, and the mobile apps, are all designed to let people create, share, and consume those business insights in the way that serves them, or that serves the role most efficiently and effectively. So we got some words that you're gonna see a lot if you start to work with Power BI, so sort of like jargon. So the first one is capacities. So capacities is the core concept of Power BI. So it represents a set of resources used to host and deliver your Power BI content. Capacities can be shared or can be dedicated. The share one, of course, is the ones that you share with other Microsoft customers, while the dedicated capacity is fully committed to a single customer. So the dedicated capacities, of course, required a subscription, and by default, the workspaces that you create are on a shared capacity. So you keep that in mind. I mentioned workspaces, but I didn't say what it was. So workspaces are containers for dashboards, reports, data sets, and also data flows in Power BI. So there are two types of workspaces, My Workspace and the Workspace. So the My Workspace is a personal workspace that only you have access to. You can give access to your My Workspace to another person if you want to collaborate. But as a best practice, I would say this is not fine. Why? Well, because we have workspaces. And those workspaces are basically made for that, for the collaboration. So you can just, share a workspace with your teammates and, collaborate in data sets or in cleaning your data or in transforming your data or in building dashboards, report, all sort of stuff. So workspaces are also the places where you can create, you can publish and manage apps for your organization or your school or your own personal projects. So think of workspaces as kind of like a staging areas and containers for all the content that will make up a Power BI app. But what is a Power BI app? So an app in Power BI is a collection of dashboards and reports built to kind of like deliver all those metrics, to the Power BI consumers in your organization, your own project, or wherever you're sharing that. The apps are, of course, interactive, but the consumers or the clients or patients cannot edit them because, of course, they don't have permission to, and they shouldn't have. Then we have what is reports. The Power BI reports is basically one or more pages of visualizations. Let's say line charts, maps, tree maps, pie charts, customized visualizations, and just as an FYI, visualizations can be called as well visuals. So you have that also on the back of your mind whenever you're reading documentation about Power BI. You can create reports from scratch within Power BI. You can import them with dashboards that other colleagues, other persons share with you. Or also Power BI can create that for you. So what does it mean? So for example, when you have your Excel workbook, like say, if that Excel workbook contains something called, I believe it is Power View Sheets, Power BI creates a built-in report based on those sheets. So that's cool because even if you don't have kind of like that development background, you can just drag and drop your Excel worksheet in there and actually being able to explore, to mine that data. So that's pretty cool on the no-code approach of Power BI. And then I mentioned biggest unit of Power BI. So a dashboard is kind of like something you create in the Power BI service or something somebody else creates and shares with you. So it's our canvas. It's a single canvas that contains you shouldn't, or more visualizations, more tiles or more widgets, those kind of visuals. So each tile it can be pinned from a report or from a Q&A displays. So a single visualization that was created from a data set and also like kind of a pin to a dashboard. So meaning the dashboard is just your blank canvas, you put anything on it, even if it's just a report. So another question that I've been asked a lot, it would be, why do we create dashboards? So what is the necessity of that even on the data science in general? So the first thing you need to know is the dashboard is good for like to see in like a one glance all the information needed to make decisions or critical decisions even. For example, in an ICU, you would have a dashboard with all the vitals from a patient, and those are critical decisions. The doctor has access to see all the critical data about the patient, of the vitals, meaning the heartbeat, the oxygen, all those sort of stuff that help them to make those decisions. Also monitor the most important information about your business. I guess in the case of an oil business will be something such as wells, the pressure on the wells, I think I read. Also the production, I believe, is important. Those sort of stuff you can take a look in one place on a dashboard. Also, I believe it's important to monitor the health of a business, a product, or a business unit, or even in the marketing area is important. So that's pretty cool about the dashboards. Now, I decided to add a small portion of data science concepts because whenever you're going in the world of visualization, even if it's not Power BI, it could be any other, you need to know a couple like a general concepts in data science. Being the most important of those, the data lifecycle. So the data lifecycle is like the 101, the Bible of the data science. What is that? And so the data lifecycle is the traveling of the data through the entire project, through the entire data science project. So it's basically six phases or steps. Being the first one, the discovery phase. On this one, you're gonna state the problem. You're gonna know the business. You're gonna ask questions. You're gonna ask yourself questions and ask, if you have a customer, ask the customer questions such as, what is the insight you want to get out of this data? What do you want to predict? Where is the data? Meaning, how is the schema of the data? Where is the data? Is it on premises? Is it on the cloud? Is it on a hybrid environment? You have it on your own computer. What is the size of the data? That's also important because you need to know when is a big data project and when it's just a data project. So those are great questions that you need to ask on that step. Then we go to the data prep, which is basically you should already have your data. And ideally, you would think your data is going to come by on a CSV file with beautiful columns, all of them named correctly, all the values correctly in those cells, but that's hardly the case. And I would say in the data world, most of the time, if not like 50, it's like 50 or 60-ish% of our time goes into this step, just because of the complexity of the data and how, dirty is the data. So here you have null values that you need to treat. you must have, that's all. And then you go to the plan model, which is basically say, okay, what inputs do I need to answer my questions? And that there is the part of exploring and transforming the data. So based on the inputs you need, you're gonna transform your data and you're gonna get what you need and just what you need. You're not gonna bring all the data around and through all the entire cycle of the life cycle of the data. That's not the idea, and that's why there is a step for that. Then you go to build your model, and you're here, you need to decide, let's say, I'm going to do regression in this. And then you choose your model, and based on the inputs that you already have, of course, you place those inputs in, and you got your output. And that output is going to go to the fifth step, which is communicate result. And here is where Power BI exists. You would just send out all your, all your results to the Power BI, and you will show your visualization and all this. And then after that, you measure your effectiveness. And what is this? Measure effectiveness is nothing but saying or seeing how many of those questions that you ask in discovery were answered. Did I really get something out of this data set? Did I really get the insights that I wanted? Those are the kind of questions that you need to take care of in this step. And as a side note, Power BI can actually live on the fifth, fourth, third, and second phase. But that's, again, not a great practice. Why is that? Because majority of projects, of data science projects, are huge loads of data, petabytes of data. It could be a huge stream of data, or it could be even one streaming static data. So under those circumstances, a lot of time you're gonna need, at least for the second and the third step, scalable models that are able, to scale up at the speed of the data. And that's why normally you would see people using Spark clusters, Hadoop clusters. You would see people using Databricks, which is also Spark and Hadoop clusters. We will see people using Kubernetes. All those sort of stuff is the second and third step, and even the fourth, because they are scalable and they can, grab all the amount of data. In Exchange Power BI, it can't take that much. Yes, it can, but I mean, it's pretty difficult. The scalability there is not as flexible as the other services around. And that's why it's a bad practice. But if you're going to do a simple project, let's say for, well, not simple, a project for college or a master's, you can pretty much use the Power BI to do all those steps in one. Then we got the data set. Data set is basically a collection of data that you import or, well, connect to your Power BI. As I mentioned before, the data set, you can connect any kind of data to the Power BI, from AWS, Google Cloud, to same Azure data sets, to your on-premise one. If you want to connect to your laptop as well, database, you do it, or a VM hosted somewhere, also you can do that. And the data sets in the Power BI world are associated with a workspace. So you can do a single workspace per data set, or you can share a data set across multiple workspaces. But there is a thing that you need to keep in mind as well with the shared data sets. It is always a great practice if you're working somewhere in an oil industry, doing projects for, doing projects for the oil industry and using a data set. You need to keep in mind that all the projects, all the data science projects in the organization should use a consistent base. And this is for any data science project. If you want to have great results, if you really want to get consistent outputs, you need in the case of Power BI, using the same base in every single workspace. You're using the same base data. Therefore, it's consistent. That's something that also you need to keep in mind, not only for Power BI, but for any data science project. This is what I call a healthy data culture. It's like a healthy diet kind of thing. So that's an advice, because myself, I used different inconsistent data set when I was starting, and I had a ton of problems. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Okay, now we go with DAX. DAX, as I mentioned before, is a great tool that comes with Power BI. And what is DAX? Well, DAX is a collection of functions that you have operators as well, constants. Those can be used in a formula or an expression to calculate and pretty much like return. If you want one or multiple variables, you can return them. And why is this good? Because sometimes you need something beyond whatever Power BI is. It has already built in on measure-wise. Meaning, let's say in the healthcare industry, for example, if I have a database that has all the patients, but I want to know how many patients that had 22 years suffer from a heart attack in the month of May of 2018, for example, is really specific. Or I want to know, the costs, how much they spend as a whole. This is really specific, and this is why I do a DAX expression saying if age equals 22 and year 2019, and you do all the operations there. So it's pretty great. That's what I call customization on data exploration level. That's something that you need to have on your toolbox. I'm just gonna name it because it has its own syntax. It's basically a language, let's say. And I mentioned Python and R. A lot of data science people are Python and R lovers. I am a Python lover, therefore I love this. It is the Python scripting part, and also you can have R scripting part. And with Python, you can actually import libraries such as pandas, which is widely used. So this is definitely something that you want to keep on your toolbox at all times when you're starting to work with Power BI. And also, something that I forgot to mention, Power BI has templates of apps, meaning if you need something that is not highly customized and is something plain, such as, for example, right now, what is highly used is the COVID-19 screening. That's a template that you can just pretty much, click, next, done. You have that. And I think you have also patients in the ER, I believe. But there are many others. Of course, I know just the healthcare because I work with it every day. But yeah, so that's also something that you keep in mind, just in case you have a project in college or on your master's, and you just go and search for templates that could be useful as well. And I believe we are going with Trevor and his demo.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alejandra.
All right.
Let me go ahead and share my screen now.
Sure.
Give me 1 second. Alrighty. Let's see, can everyone see my screen now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Sure.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to walk through a demonstration of some of the visualization that we'll be doing during the workshop, and some definitions of things for what you're actually going to see in the UI for Power BI before we get started, to actually manipulate some data and take a look at what the actual process of building these kinds of charts is. So let's actually, I'll open a new report here so we can start with a blank page, and then I can show you kind of what's in this report that we kind of pre-built a little bit. And I can walk through the different tabs and tools and features of the actual UI that you'll see in Power BI. Okay, let me close this one. So when you first open Power BI, there's a number of key components of the GUI that I'll make note of here. The first one is the ribbon. Anyone who's worked with any other Microsoft Office or Power Apps products will be familiar with a ribbon at the top where you have different tools, how you can save your files, how you can, work with the application itself. And the second is the report view, or the canvas. That's this big blank section in the middle. This is where we're actually going to create visualizations, arrange them, import all of our different modules, things like that, whatever we want to build from our data. And the next one is the data view. So down here, you can have different tabs. So if you have reports that we want to build with multiple different pages, then we can do that for the report as well. Today, when we get to the workshop portion of it, we're going to focus on a single page and building a fairly simple visualization, just because we want to make this an introductory class for people of all skill levels or exposure, basically, to Power BI. So we're going to get kind of started from scratch, basically. And then you have the model view, which allows you to visually set the relationship between tables or elements. That's also done in the canvas, basically. And the relationship is where you have, right here. It wasn't updating on my screen. So here you have, like I said, the report view, and then data view, which is where we're actually going to see our data. And then the model view, where we can visually set the relationship between tables or elements. And a relationship is where you have two or more tables that are linked together because they contain related data. Like, say, for example, you have the name of some element, and you have one table which has elements over time, and you have another table which has some static data that just says the name of the element or something related to it, like a company name or something like that. You can link those tables together, and then you can display that data in one of your reports. And I'll get to that once we walk through the actual demonstration and the workshop towards the end. But I just kind of want to bring up all this for right now, just so that we're all familiar with what the UI looks like. So I guess I should ask first. Everybody has access to, I think it was a virtualized instance of Power BI, and they can kind of follow along while we're walking through this. Is that so?
Yes.
Okay, great. Cool. Just wanted to make sure we were on the same page there. So the next thing, if I go back to my canvas or my report view, is the visualizations pane. You can change different visualizations, customize colors, axes, apply filters. You can drag fields. This is basically, if you see here, like stack bar chart, line chart, etc. This is basically where we're going to change whatever visualizations we're displaying in our canvas. And then you have the fields pane here, which we can use to query different elements or filters, which we can drag into the report view and search whatever data we have loaded. Let me open up again the example maybe, and I can walk through those same things that we just talked about and how they're kind of used in an actual report. So I guess first I want to talk about one of the most important features of Power BI, as it is a data visualization tool. I'm going to talk about the different visualizations that are available. So we've pre-built ahead of time this dashboard, which shows some data for different well bores that are in, and forgive me, I'm not an oil or petroleum engineering guy, so I may not be as familiar with what some of this data means. I'm sure you guys are, but this is the kind of visualization that you could come up with. I'm sure, you know, we can come up with some different visualizations, but this is basically what we have here. So the different types of visualizations that are available, I was talking about. Right now, what we're showing is we have a line chart, but there are a bunch of different types of visualizations available after you get your data imported, and we'll walk through that. Right now, I just want to show what's possible with the tool, and then we'll kind of walk through how to actually get to this point. So let's say we have some data that's being displayed here with our line chart, right? We're seeing water volume and oil production and gas production over time. That's controlled right here in this visualizations page by whatever we have in the different fields right here. Like you see for our axes, it's weekly production, which is our production data per week over time. And then we have for our values, oil, water, and gas. And those are all selected from our fields on the right-hand side. So this is the data that we actually have loaded, the queries that we have in Power BI. And I'll show you guys how we can do that once we get through the demonstration. So one of the neat things about Power BI is when we have a visualization like this, like for example, this line chart, for customization, we can actually just click on one of these other visualizations and it will import all of the data that we're using and build a new type of visualization for us automatically. So let's say, for example, I wanted to do a stacked area chart like this. It can easily take that data that we were looking at just a moment ago and import it into a new visualization, and we can kind of play around with the different visualizations and see the way we want to actually represent our data. However, that being said, not all visualizations are a good fit for all different types of data, of course. For example, in this one we're looking at right now, the production of gas for these wellbores is actually a much higher volume overall than water and oil. And if we do that actual stacked area chart, or like this area chart, you'll notice that the data kind of gets skewed a little bit and we only see the fine grain detail for gas at that point, because this one has them all on the same line, as opposed to this one where we can put them on a separate axes. We've got two y-axes here. I think actually, let me, there was one, I'm not sure if it's, I think the stacked area chart, you can put it on a separate axis. Yeah, no, just the area chart. So for like the stacked area chart, they all have to be on the same axes. You can't have two separate ones. But for the area chart, you can have a secondary value here and then have them each displayed on their own axes. But the data gets a little bit muddled at that point. So I prefer for this type of thing to use just a general line chart. So there, like I said, there's lots of different types of visualizations available. We have bar charts, area charts, columns. You can have what are called cards, which are these ones showing right here, which is a great way to show static data. So for example, right now we're showing one particular wellbore, which it has the name code for it there, and sorry, the name and the code for that wellbore displayed. These are the type of things you might want to display that don't have a value over time or like different axes that we might want to display. And we can also do things like, I'm not sure if this will visualize very well, but we can do donut charts, which you might typically see in like the breakdown of a paycheck that will show different percentages for things like how much is going to tax, how much is going to healthcare, how much is going to your 401k, things like that. Donut charts are commonly used for financial representations. And then you have things like gauge charts. So we have a lot of visualizations that are built in with Power BI that you can get by default. But one of the greatest features, in my opinion, is actually the ability to import more visualizations, either custom ones that either you or your company has built, or those that are made available publicly from the app source. So what is the app source? App source is a place where Microsoft and other community members can contribute to different Power BI visuals for like a public benefit, and they can be published to the app source. Like if I click more visuals, you can see from AppSource. And we can download these visuals and add them to our Power BI reports. So there's a lot of different companies that have produced Power BI visuals that can be displayed. And we'll go through that during the example as well. Like for example, this one here, the gauge chart that's showing our pressure, that one is actually a custom visual that's been downloaded from AppSource. We do have gauge charts that are built in on Power BI, but I find the custom one to be a little bit nicer. That dial gauge there that we're showing. So yes, basically AppSource is a place for apps or add-ins and extensions to Microsoft software, and it connects millions of users of products from such as Microsoft 365, Azure, Dynamics 365, Power BI, of course, to solutions that can help you get work done more efficiently and more insightfully than before. Let's actually open AppSource here, and we can see kind of what that pane looks like a little bit. The AppSource also includes certified Power BI visuals, which would be visuals that meet a certain code requirements that the Microsoft Power BI team has tested and approved. And you'll see those have a little check mark next to them, actually. Let's see. I think my Power BI desktop stopped responding. Hilarious. Well, let me try and open it here. There we go. So the AppSource, this is the little blue check mark that I was mentioning before. You'll see those next to certified visuals, basically, those that have been approved by Microsoft. You can download any of the other ones that are available in AppSource as well, of course, and there are a lot of good ones there. But it's really nice. Like say, for example, if I go to gauges down here, you can see that dial gauge. That's the one that was being used in this report, actually, as a custom visual. Aside from those visuals, we have other things like maps. If I come back to my first chart, there you go. Now it's working. It was just taking a little bit of time there. Things like maps, like geolocation-based visuals. Those are some of my favorites, actually. I find like representing data in a geolocation-based method is really nice to show how the trend happens for different areas. In this case, we're looking at data from the sample that is all from one particular field of oil wells that are off the coast of Norway. So they're not separated out too much. But let's say, for example, we had the same thing for all of the oil wells in this company, like all across the world. You could represent the data spread out, basically, and see the different production in different areas. But it's just an example to give you an idea kind of what is possible with this kind of visualization. Another great thing about Power BI and having these different visuals, the visuals all play together, I'll say. They all work together synchronously without you needing to set up any additional like coding or like features enabled. And what I mean by that is this. If I click on one of the circles in this map representing one of these well bores, like for example, right now we're looking at F1C, this one right here. If I click instead on one of these other ones, you'll notice that it updates automatically. We see all of the different visuals on our pane updating to choose the one that I've selected. And I didn't have to add any extra link between those visualizations. I didn't have to like symbolically connect them. All I had to do was set up this visualization so that we have the wellbore name attached to both of these charts, and then it automatically knows how to filter or slice the data, I'll say. So if I click on one of these other ones, you'll then see the data automatically change whenever I click on one of them. And you can also click for a particular week, like we have our weekly production set up here. I can click on one of those, and then we'll get things like our pressure and temperature corresponding to that day also, just like we had when we were slicing for one of these different wells as well. Okay, So let's see what's next. There are quite a few different visuals as well available. I want to kind of walk through a little bit. I'm going to show a place where you can actually look at some different samples that are available for Power BI, ones that are published by Microsoft. And I can put this link in the chat, actually, I think, for the Teams meeting. That way you guys have it available there. Here we go. There it is. And you guys can kind of take some of these samples and play around with them independently and see what's available there. But I can walk through some of them now so we can get an idea of some of the other visualizations that are available with Power BI, aside from the ones that we're going to walk through during the workshop today as well. So yeah, it's a great resource, this one that I've posted in the chat for getting an idea of the different kind of visualizations that are available in Power BI. And having something to play with as a base, because it can be quite intimidating, Power BI, when you're first getting started. There's a lot to go through with this thing, and sometimes you don't really know where to look first. I know when I first got started using Power BI, I hated I hated it. It was really confusing and difficult to use, but the more I used it, the more I loved it, and it's my favorite data visualization tool at this point. Let's see. Someone posted in the chat, curious why the bubble sizes are varying, and is it based on cumulative volume? Yes, that's correct. For this map, it is based on actually oil volume, but you could change it based on like gas production or water or whatever it was we had in our measure. Like you can see if I click on this map, you can see bubble size here based on bore oil volume from our data. But that being said, this particular visualization, and that's something that I should cover, so that's a good point. Any tile that you see in our dashboards, like our line chart here, our pressure gauge, our temperature bar chart, any of these, they'll all have this format pane that's available under the visualization feature. Sorry, under the visualization pane. And that allows us to control like how the data is displayed. And if it's a built-in Power BI one, they'll all look very similar. If it's a custom one that's made by a third-party tool, these can be they can vary in how the layout is actually. But in general, you'll be able to control things like the title that shows up. Let's just click there and show what's available there. Yeah, the title that shows up, how the data is displayed, the colors that we're using for our visualization, the background color, borders, shadows, all sorts of things like that to make it look pretty essentially. But aside from that, this one is like I mentioned, a third-party one. This one is one that's been downloaded from AppSource that you actually need a license for. So we probably won't be using this one during the workshop, but we'll be recreating basically all these other visualizations if we have time for it. But this one is very neat. A lot of the more premium ones will have some cool features. So for example, this one we can change from circles of various sizes to a heat map instead. Which is nice. So you can then visualize the amount of production as a heat map instead of as differently sized circles. Yeah, so there's a lot of different customization you can do there. Let me get back to though the samples that I was using before. So yeah, I posted that in the chat, and you guys can take a look at those independently. But I want to walk through some of them and kind of show some of the visualizations that we're not going to be looking at today, but that are still quite interesting. Things like the tree map, for example, the varying rectangles, like you see down here, which show you can use those also for production as well. Like we could represent different. In this case, it looks like it's representing total units of production for a manufacturer. That could be oil or water production as well, showing parts of a whole for each well, maybe, things like that. You can show again like different cards for static volume. These are the kind of reports that we can build that can show pretty complex data in a tight area where we can make a lot of comparisons between data and draw a lot of insights out of this kind of data. So we have, this is an example for sales and marketing. There's a customer procurement example, a profitability example. There's lots of samples in here that you can see from that link that I posted as well, that you can kind of play around with. And they'll allow you to download those as well. And if you have Power BI Desktop yourself or the virtualized version, you can import those and kind of play around with those as well. You can do things like waterfall charts, which are used generally to show trends for stock values, things like that. And I talked about the custom visualizations already. Let's talk about next filtering data. I think we kind of covered it a little bit, but you can filter the data that we're showing. Like, for example, clicking on one of these circles I showed before, that's one method of filtering data in Power BI. But it's a pretty important feature for Power BI. As you explore reports, or each visual will draw its underlying data from the source that contains usually a lot more data than you need. Sometimes you just need to see a subset of the data. So Power BI offers a number of different ways to actually filter and highlight the reports. And knowing how to filter the data is kind of key to finding the right visualization. And one of the most simple types of filtering that you can use on a report page is a slicer. Let's actually add one here and we can take a look at it. So I can add a new visual, and then I can make that into a slicer. It shows right here. And then I can add the field for, let's just do Wellborn name again, because that's one that makes sense. I think it's this one here, yeah. So now I have a slicer, which allows me to filter the data that I'm looking at. Let's bring that up. I'll replace our cards with this slicer instead. So aside from having like the map or some other custom visualizations that allow you to filter data, you can have just a simple slicer, which is one of the built-in visuals, and that way we can actually filter that data exactly the same way as we had for the other ones. And it'll update the same as our other visualizations, like when we were clicking on the bubbles for this one. Let's see. I think actually, hold on, wait one moment. I clicked on the wrong one, didn't I? Yeah, it should be this one. Wellbore name, okay. Get rid of that one. Here it is. There we go. That's better. Okay, so yeah, the slicers can provide cues for ways you can filter the data on a report page, and there's a bunch of different types of slicers. In this case, we're using a categorical slicer, but they have numeric slicers, so you can like filter out data that is under a certain production level or above a certain production level, or you can filter out data from a particular year. Like, let's say we don't want to look at the year 2012 for whatever reason. We can have slicers that would filter out those years, and we just have to change the field that we're slicing on, basically. And they make it easier to filter multiple visualizations on the page at once. Like I mentioned, when we click one of these, it's going to update all of the visualizations on the page so that it matches with that. Another way to filter the data is to use the filters pane. You'll notice in my report here, I have a filters pane. And we can just search for a particular data, or we can add data fields here to filter on, and that'll allow us to like change the information that we're using. You can think of it as, I prefer to use the slicers generally because it's actually built in to the report itself, as opposed to being kind of like a side thing off of the report. But you can add filters for reports, for pages, for a particular visual, Like for example, if I click on this visual, it's going to show me the filters that are on this visual already. For some reason, I've excluded one day. I can remove that. But yeah, and you can add like drill through filters, things like that. One of the more advanced features that we won't actually be getting into today for Power BI is the use of buttons. You can add, like if I go to Insert and then Buttons, you can add different buttons to make more complex reports, like left or right arrows. So you can move through pages. Like for example, you could add an arrow that will allow you to scroll through the pages that we have down here on the report, or do drill throughs, things like that. So that's a little bit more complex though. Today we're kind of just going to focus on some of the more simple features so we can actually start building some basic visualizations and get you started. So I'm going to talk also about transforming data. If I go back to the home page, you'll see right here a button that says Transform Data. This is going to be used to transform our source data. So if I come back to the data tab here, you'll see the data that we're actually working with for this report, right? And this is what's actually fueling all of our visualizations. But sometimes your data might contain extra bits that you don't need or have data in the wrong format. We can actually use either the Power Query editor or just the built-in features of this data pane to change that data. So for example, I can come here and just like Excel, I can add a filter for a particular, if I wanted to know, I think these are all in the same field, but if there was one field I wanted to filter out, for example, yeah, these are all in the same field. Then I could add a filter here to this column, and then that would update actually the data that's being shown in our report. So yes, let's see if you want to take a look. Actually, you can see the Power Query editor. Like if I come down here and click Edit Query, that'll open up the data transform pane as well. And then I can open my advanced editor right here. And that will actually show us the queries in DAX that have been displayed. This is how we're showing, like transforming the data. For the most part, like Alejandra had mentioned at the start, you're not going to be getting a perfect CSV or database or whatever the case may be that shows the data in exactly the format you want, and you don't need to do any transforms or any cleaning of the data. Most of the time with data science and data visualization, you're going to need to do some transformation or cleaning of the data beforehand before it's actually able to be used in our reports or dashboards. So yeah, we can do it through the query by manually editing it here, or you'll notice we can add filters like I had mentioned before. And let's just add one here for date production. I'll say I can add a date filter before. So I'm only interested in dates before a particular date, let's say. I can enter like dates before, I think this one only goes to like 2017 or something, like May 10th, 2017 maybe. I can hit OK, and then that'll filter out all the dates that are after that date. And if you notice, we actually have that showing up in the applied steps column over here under our query settings on the right-hand side. And we can actually walk back through the different steps that have been applied, the changes that have been made to this query. So we can edit them or remove steps that we've made before. Like for example, I've already done some cleaning of this data, which we're going to do during the workshop here in about 10 minutes or so. But that's what we're gonna work through. But you can actually walk back through the changes that we've made rather than just having like an undo button. You can jump between the different steps that you've taken to clean or transform the data, and you can remove or modify them actually. Like for example, I can click the little settings icon where we just filtered the rows, and I can actually change what filter we put there. I can then change it to be like, let's say I only want the ones that are before May 1st. And then that'll actually change the step that I've applied. It's really nice for transforming of data. You do, though, need to be careful when you're transforming and cleaning data. You don't want to misrepresent the data that you're showing. You want to make sure that, because you could modify the data so much that it's not a true representation of what you're trying to transform, right? You can manipulate it pretty thoroughly. Yeah, so yeah, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so you can import data from almost any source for Power BI. Let me close the query editor and actually show that. Not now. Like if I come back up to our report pane and I go File, there's a little tab here that says Get Data. And you can see these are the most common places to import data. For today, we're going to be importing data from an Excel workbook, but there's lots of other places that we can actually get our data from. It has integration with Microsoft Azure, of course, all sorts of cloud computing formats, you know, databases that might be hosted either on a private server or in the cloud somewhere, Cosmos DB, publicly available Power BI datasets that have been published on the marketplace, integration with FHIR servers, which is for healthcare, fast health interoperability server, things like that. Basically, you can import data from all sorts of different sources from Power BI, and it's a visualization and modeling tools work best with column-based data, so things like Excel, for example. But sometimes your data is not formatted in simple columns, in which case you can, you know, do some cleaning with the Power Query editor in order to actually modify the data so that it's usable for your reports. So there's a number of different ways we can clean the data. Aside from just filtering rows, you can also transpose the data. Like let's say you have data that's in a row format as opposed to column format. You can click on one of the rows and then transpose that data. If I go back to transform data, I can show that like this. We can transpose the rows if I wanted to show a row in a column format instead. Another thing that we can do is to either change the type of data. Like for example, you'll see right here the data type that's been detected automatically. See how it says ABC or 123 here. This is formatted as a string. This is formatted as a date. There's a little calendar. These ones are formatted as integer numbers. And then we have some that are picked as decimal numbers. But let's say we have some information that we don't want to be able to do sums on, that we want to show as a string, for example. So like well-bore code. This, although it is a number, we don't actually want that to be represented as an integer because we don't want to be adding up well-bore codes. We don't want to do summations or averages of well-bore codes. That's more like a static data. So you'll notice I've changed that to be a string format instead, so a series of characters instead of treated as a number. We should do the same with the field code, but we're not using that for our data basically in this case. So that column could probably just be removed. Let's see. So yeah, that's how you can kind of change the different data types that are applied here. Another thing that it's important to mention, let me close the query editor again and go back to the report. I think my map is not showing for some reason. Let's actually jump over to the other one because this will be a better representation here. So this one without the map. When we're looking at our data, right, like right now, we're looking at oil, water, and gas production for weekly values, you can change how these values are shown. So right now we're showing the average for each of those values. Since we're doing data over a week, we can do the average, but we can also change that to be a summation or get the minimum value during that time, maximum value during that time, things like that. Number of values that show up, which would be count, median, etc. You can change kind of how the field is aggregated. And working with aggregates in Power BI service can sometimes be confusing. Like if you have a numeric field and it won't let you change the aggregation, it might be a string. Typically, those type of issues come from how the data is being presented to Power BI, and which we'll walk through during the workshop as well. I think that should be pretty much everything I wanted to walk through about the general components and pieces of Power BI. I think we should be ready to jump into kind of creating this visualization. This is the one we're going to try and recreate from scratch with the data that you guys have in the Excel sheet already. So I think we're ready to go ahead and jump in. Does everybody have, I guess, Power BI already open? You have your data set available?
I do.
Okay. Cool. Alrighty, let's go ahead and
quick. I just wanted to make an announcement, just in case you get stuck at any point during the workflow that Trevor is going to take us through. Please feel free to join the Zoom call on the side, so one of us can take a look at your screen and help you out. Okay. The Zoom link should be in the same email you got this link in. So just as a side note, or you can just give in your queries in the chat box, and one of us can help you out.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Venkata.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So I'm going to get a new report open. We opened one earlier. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is import our data. So when you first open Power BI, you'll be greeted with a page asking you to add data. You can either click here to import our data from Excel, or we can come up to File and then click Get Data or Import, and I can choose Excel from there. Right, and we're going to choose our Excel spreadsheet, which has our well production in it. We're going to wait for that to load, and then we're going to have to choose what columns we actually want to use, or rather what pages we actually want to use from this Excel report. For this one, we're not interested in the monthly production data. We're only interested in the daily production data and the wellbore locations. Like I mentioned at the start, we're probably not going to be using the map data just for the workshop, but we do want to import it anyway so that we can walk through how the relationships are managed between differing tables or differing data sources. We can treat these different tables or pages that are showing up in the Excel data as different data sources, for example. So if we had multiple Excel sheets, they would show up the same way as the different pages that are showing up here. So this is all the different pages from that one Excel sheet. We're going to go ahead and import all three of them so that we can kind of show how those relationships might be managed between differing data sets. Even though two of them might not be relevant for our usage, they're still going to be useful for loading into our data set. Let's go ahead and click all three and then click load. We can also click transform data instead, and that'll allow us to start editing the queries immediately. But I want to just load the data and kind of take a look at what's there before we start transforming it. Okay, we'll wait a little while for that to get imported. Okay, and then we can see the data once it's imported showing up in the data tab. So right here, over here on the left-hand side, underneath our reports, we have the tab for data. And if I click on that one, we can see the three different queries, the three different fields that are showing up on our right-hand side that we've just imported. And we can see all the data that's showing up there. You cannot modify the data from this data tab. This is only to display what's being shown in our queries. If we want to change the data, we have to use either our query editor, like right here, and hit edit query, or we can use transform data from our report view. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do is actually transform the data. Let's take a look actually at the Excel sheet. I'm going to open this one up so we can kind of compare like what we're seeing in Power BI with what we're seeing in the Excel sheet. Essentially, it's just imported them one for one from Excel into Power BI. And the data source for Excel is not going to change. We changed the queries that are in Power BI. This Excel sheet is not going to change actually. We're going to be filtering the data that we're showing here, but it's not actually going to modify our source in any way. It's just going to change how we're displaying it to our Power BI. Our data set is being displayed and handled basically. So yeah, you'll notice in the Excel sheet, we have those 3 pages: daily production data, monthly production data, and wellbore location. I believe this should be the same data set that you guys have. Is that correct? Or does yours look different?
Yeah, we do have like extra tabs, but
oh, that's all right.
We also have that one. So
okay, I think then it should be. Let me see.
We have injection wells and production wells.
Yes, I have that version as well of the data. We can use that one as instead, just that we're on the same page. Like right here, if you look at this one, I can go ahead and use this one instead so that we all have the same thing. So it should look like this then, I guess. Daily production, injection, production, monthly, and you guys also have wellbore locations.
Yeah, but like we did not check I did not check when I imported. I didn't check those 2 ones. Okay. I only checked the 3 ones you told us.
So we should have the exact same data. They're the same sheets. As long as you just click daily production, monthly production, and then the wellbore, you'll have exactly the same thing that I'm showing in my report right here. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I knew there were 2 different versions of the data set floating out there. But yeah, we should have those three basically. You guys had a couple extra columns, but if you just check daily production, monthly production, and wellbore, you'll have exactly the same thing that's showing up in my data set essentially. Okay, so now that we're on the same page and we know what the data is that we're looking at, we can actually start to transform it and do some cleaning of the data so that we can start to do some visualization. So if I come back to my report tab, and then I see right here the button that says transform data, I can click on that one. And that'll open up our Power Query editor, right? And we'll see the 3 queries we have right now: wellbore location, monthly production, and daily production data. So let's say for daily production data, you'll see a number of different columns here. Let's get rid of the columns that we are not interested in. So let's say we care about the wellbore name and the wellbore code. This one, NPD wellbore code, but we're not interested in this one. So what we can do is we can actually click on the column at the top like this. And if you hit hold control, and then click on another column, you'll highlight both. Or if you click on one column and then hold shift and click on another one farther away, you can highlight all of them at once, like that. If I hit both control and shift and then click on one of these columns, I can click on just one individually like this and then remove just the ones I don't want. So I click this first column, hold control, and then click this one, and then hold shift with control. I can highlight all these, or you can just hold control and click them individually if it's more simple. So I want to get rid of the columns that we are not interested in, those that are not useful for our data, which are going to be these ones: wellbore code, NPD field name, field code, facility name. Those are all the same thing for every row. So we're not interested in displaying those. We want the ones that are actually going to show us what data we want to present. So let's see, there's a couple of these data columns that might not be relevant as well. We can remove some of those. So what we want to show for our visualization is going to be the downhole pressure and downhole temperature. We're going to add some gauges for that, but we don't care about, for this data set at least, tubing, analyst pressure, choke size, those type of things. And like I mentioned, we're removing these columns now, but we're not actually modifying the data set. If we decide we want to add these back in later, we can modify our query to add these back in later. The reason we're modifying them now is because we have a fairly large data set. This one is actually, well, this one is actually fairly small, but a lot of the times when you're working with data sets in Power BI, you don't want to have extraneous data that's in there that's going to slow down your queries or your workflow for no additional like benefit, basically. When you're working with big data, like if we had millions of rows here, we don't want to wait, 5 minutes each time in order to do the queries we want to change the data set. So this one will be wellhead pressure, also not interested, wellhead temperature, choke size. The main thing that we're concerned with here is downhole pressure, temperature, and then the production volumes, oil volume, gas volume, water volume. All right, so we've selected all the different columns that we are not actually interested in, and I can do one of two things. I can click remove columns here, or I can right click on one of these columns and then click remove columns. So I'm just going to click remove columns there. And again, you'll notice that as we make changes, you see the applied steps coming up on the right hand side. So now if we want to add those columns back in, I can just click the X button next to the applied step and those columns will reappear again from our original data set. Okay, so we've removed some of the columns we don't want. The next thing is, let's say we're only interested in days for which we're producing days. We're not interested in days which we don't have any on-stream hours. Or vice versa, you'll notice that some of these columns, like you see these first three, we have 0 on-stream hours, so we don't have any production, no gas volume, no water volume. They were not producing on that day. But we also have some columns here that show on-stream hours as 0, but it's still showing some temperatures or some production showing up there. This is why we say sometimes we have unclean data. You can have things that don't make sense, that will mess up our visualizations, that might not necessarily be valid. And since we have a rather large data set, we can exclude those rows and still get our visualization the way we want it. So we're only interested in the rows which actually have production, those days where we have on-stream hours that we're producing. So what I can do is I can click the little drop down next to on-stream hours, and then I can either uncheck the value for 0, or I can add a number filter here. And let's say, for example, we're only interested in days where we had more than 1 hour that we were doing production. So I can say is greater than 1. So if our on-stream hours is greater than 1, then we include it. So now we have our filter for this row. Now we've removed some of those extra columns, or extra rows rather, for which we didn't have any on-stream hours showing up. And we can do the same thing for oil and gas volumings, for example, if we wanted to. And I think we will go ahead and remove the rows for 0 for oil and gas volume as well. So we only want those days for which we have production values showing up. And we can do, again, we can either uncheck 0, or we can add a number filter greater than 1, for example. And now if we decide we want to change that later, like I can click the little settings icon next to our applied steps over on the right hand side, and I can actually modify that retroactively to say maybe I only wanted days where our production was over 1,000 or units or whatever the case may be. You can also click the advanced query editor, and then we can modify multiple rows in the same filter, basically. So instead of like filtering one at a time, I could do the advanced filter here, and then I could add multiple rows here and filter out each of the ones that I didn't want a production of 0 or whatever the case may be for that. Next thing we want to take a look at is there's a couple of different well types showing up here, actually. We have both production wells and water injection wells. Let's say for the sake of this example, we're only interested in production wells, those that are producing oil, gas, and water, rather than the water injection, the injection wells. What we can do then is uncheck this one. And then now we've got that one filtered out as well. And we're only looking at the production wells. So now we have some data that's much more clean from our daily production query, right? That's a little bit more usable for our reports. But we want to take a look also at our locations data, because there's something interesting in this sheet that makes that we want to change a little bit. If we look at wellbore location instead, you'll notice a couple of things here. First off, we have the column names right here, imported as column 1, column 2, well position, and then column 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we have our actual column titles right here in the first row: wellbore name, monthly, latitude, longitude, north, whatever. If we look at our data set, it's this one, the Excel sheet, you'll see that's because of the way that data was set in Excel. So like we had mentioned before, we're not always going to have totally clean data. It may be presented in a different manner, and there's going to need to be some processing done, in Power BI before it's ready to do, to actually use. So this is a very easy thing to correct. We can actually just come here to our query and then click this option here, which says used first row as headers. So I can click that one, and it will promote our headers up to our first row up to the headers. So now we have the proper rows showing up for our wellbore locations. Okay, and now we have a much more clean data set that we can start to do visualizations on for both our daily production data and our wellbore location. Monthly production, we're not going to worry about cleaning right now. We're not going to use any of that data, but what we are going to do is show how the relationships between these different queries can be built so that you can automatically get data from multiple different data sources to be shown in your visualizations. So I'm going to click Close and Apply on my Power Query Editor up in the top left. And then it's going to apply the query changes. And then if we click on our Data tab again on the left-hand side, we can see that that is reflected in what we're showing in our data that's being presented for our queries now. We don't have those extra columns anymore. We've filtered only for on-stream hours greater than 1. All those changes we made is now showing up in our data pane. So now, again, before we can get started with visualizations, there is one more step we want to make, which is going to be on the model pane, just under the data one, right here, our model. You can see here the 3 different queries represented in a visual format, basically, that shows each of the columns that are in our data sets and the names of our data sets, essentially. These are all coming from the same Excel sheet, but if we had multiple Excel sheets or like a blob storage or a database or something, you would see exactly the same thing here, one for each of the panes in each of those data sources. And what we want to do now actually is click Manage Relationships. And we can auto detect. I think if we have multiple different columns in these data sets that have the same name and the same set of data inside them, Power BI will automatically detect a relationship between those columns, and we'll add them here without you needing to do anything if we click auto detect. In this case, though, I believe our data has different names for different columns, which actually show the same data. So we're going to try to auto detect, but I don't think it's going to find anything. Yeah, auto detect found no new relationships. So what we're going to do is we're going to add one manually. So if I click now on new, I can select the tables and columns that are related. So what we want to do is we want to add a relationship between daily production and wellbore location, and one between wellbore location and monthly production. So we can actually correlate where our wells are with the production values that those wells are creating. So to make it more clear, I'm going to open the Excel sheet again just so you can see. We have this query that shows us where the wells are, and we have this daily production table that shows how much those wells produced, but they're not in the same set of data. Like, we don't have the location over here in another set of columns. So what we're doing is we're going to create a relationship between the tables based on the wellbore name and the wellbore location, which actually show that data showing up. Let's see, this one is the one we have. So yes, if I come back to my Power BI, we're going to click first our wellbore location, and we're going to choose the name that corresponds with our daily production data. So the second table we want to create a relationship between is daily production data. So now, if we look at the columns we have available, right, we'll notice two that actually have the same set of data between our wellbore location query and our daily production data query, which is going to be this one. It's actually the one labeled monthly and MPD wellbore name. So if you notice, those ones actually have the same values for each of the columns. So wellbore name monthly and NPD wellbore name. Power BI also automatically detects the cardinality of relationships, meaning if there is only one value in one table and multiple values showing up for that same value in another table, that's what it's going to detect automatically. If you have a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship, etc. So in this case, since we have one value in wellbore location showing up with a whole bunch of different values for daily production, that means our cardinality is one-to-many. And we want to make this one active so that it actually starts correlating that data when we do our data visualization. Okay. And cross-filter direction, I'm going to make that both. Cross-filter direction enables us to, when we're slicing data, either go from one table to the other. Basically, we would only need single in this case, but I'm just going to make it both because I typically do that as a best practice, because there's some tables in which case you might have multiple different rows. Basically, what it's going to allow us to do is to filter the data in both directions when we're doing our reports. For example, like filtering on wellbore name or filtering on like one of our other values like oil production, it'll change both of these values basically, if that makes sense. Okay, so now we have our first link added, and we want to add a second one. And we'll do this one also between wellbore location and monthly production data. So the reason why I'm doing this is just to demonstrate how you can have a web of different links between different queries, basically. So we're going to do the same thing, wellbore name and wellbore name monthly. All right, and I'm going to click OK there. And then I'm going to close our relationship manager here. And then you're going to notice a couple of, oh, actually, I need to change that one. I can actually click on this link and click properties, and then I'm going to change our filter to be both directions because I forgot to do that. So now you see links showing up between our queries, between our tables that we have showing up in Excel. And if we highlight over or hover over the link between them, it'll show you the values that are correlated. And now we have actually an implicit relationship between daily production and monthly production. These two are actually connected as well. We don't now need to manually go in and create another link between daily production and monthly production. They're both linked through wellbore location with that name showing up there. So now we have our data ready to start producing visuals on. So I'm going to come back up to our report pane, and first thing we're going to do is add a new visual. So if I come up to our tab on the home page, there's a little box that says new visual. I'll click on that one, and it's going to show a box showing up in our canvas. This is where we're going to add our data visualization. So I can change the size of it, drag it down here, and I'm going to click first on the type of visualization that we want to present. So the one that we're trying to recreate right now is our line chart, but you can play around with whatever one of these visuals you want. If you want to do a bar chart instead, go for it, and you can try and follow along while we're creating one of the other visuals as well. Or we can just make a line chart for now and then kind of flip between the different visualizations afterward and see how it displays, see how we might want to actually show our data. So I'm going to click line chart here, and then I'm going to add our data fields here for axes and values. So on the right hand side, we have our fields, and daily production is what we're interested in right now. We want to open up that one, click the little drop down next to it, and then our axis is going to be our dates. So we want to do an overtime chart for production. So we have this one column here, date PRD, date of production. I'm going to drag that to our axes, right? And then we want to have our values. The things we want to show are our oil production in values, water production in values, and gas production in values. And it is going to automatically create the visual for us. Now, once we add gas production in there into our values, we'll notice that something happens. The values for our gas production are far off from what we have for our oil and water. Oil and water are pretty close together, but gas production, as far as units of measurement go, far outweighs them. So now we've got two tiny lines at the bottom and one big one for gas production that is kind of outweighing all of our other data. So what we can do with that instead is take gas production and move it over to our secondary values, and that's going to put it on a separate axis. We're going to have two y-axes showing up here instead. So now we can actually make a more direct comparison between these data sets. So we have on the left-hand side showing our oil and water production, and on the right-hand side showing our gas production. So next thing that we're going to want to do is you'll notice that the names for each of these are hard to read. It's using the names that are actually represented in our data set by default for each of the columns. So I have bore oil volume, bore oil water, and bore gas volume by year. What we can do is we can rename these values right here if we double click on them, or if we click the little drop down next to them and click rename. And when we rename that field, it's going to automatically update it in all the places that it's showing up, in our legend, in our title, and in our axes labels. So I can rename this one to oil volume. I can rename this one to water volume. Notice that as we rename them, it actually starts showing up like that in our data visualization. And I can rename this one to date instead. But let's first actually show this. So you can rename them in the values field and it'll show up automatically there. But something else you can do for most visualizations, if we click on the Format tab, and then we go down to whatever axis it is, like for example, let's show the axis or title. We've already changed the axis. Let's look at the title, the chart title. you can change that manually right here. So right now we have oil volume, water volume, because we renamed our values there, but we still have bore gas volume showing up in the title. We could rename that one manually and modify that, or we could rename the axes manually if we don't like what's showing up in our, like, automatically from our axes. For right now, let's go ahead and rename them from the values, but I just wanted to show that there's a way to rename them manually. If you want to change it so that it's not represented by one of our values that is in here, you could manually rename it to whatever. Like, we could change the name of this chart, like the title that's showing up there, to be just bore well production or something like that, as opposed to showing specifically the values that are showed up there. But for right now, let's go ahead and rename the fields, because that'll make it populate for us automatically. So we're going to rename our secondary value field to gas production, or gas volume rather. Okay, so next thing we're going to want to change is actually our date field. By default, when we add a date into an axis, it's going to show us the date hierarchy, meaning right now it's showing us the summation for each year, right? You can right click on it, on this chart rather, sorry, and click show next level. And that will drill down to the next level in the hierarchy. So we have in our hierarchy year, quarter, month, day. If I drill down again to show next level, it's going to show me the production by quarter. Sorry, by month, because I was already showing quarter. However, this is not a true overtime chart. What this is showing us is the total for January, all the Januaries added together. So our data is from, I think, like 2009 to 2017 or something like that. This is the summation for every January in that year. This is the summation for every February in all those years, right? Because we're doing right now our aggregates as sums. We could change it to be average, which we're going to do in a moment. But for right now, I just wanted to make the point that this is not actually an overtime chart. This is adding up every June, so we can compare every year by month. But that's not what we want to do with this chart. What we want to do is show an actual overtime chart of our production. Oops, I dragged the chart. And to do that, we can click the little drop down here next to our axes for our date of production. And we can actually change that one right here to date of production instead of date hierarchy. And now we're going to get an actual overtime chart. So something you'll notice right away when we do an overtime chart, we have data that varies fairly wildly from day to day in our production. So you see that it becomes very spiky and not very meaningful, hard to read, because we have one value for each day, and it's not consistent. We have some days where there's a lot of production and some days where there's very little. So what can we do about that? We can change our axes here to be a group instead of the raw value. So if we click the little drop down and then we click new group, and you can do this for any of our values or whatever fields you're modifying here. You can actually group them together into what are called bins. Okay, so right now we're going to click group type. We're not going to worry about lists of bins. We're just going to worry about size of bins, number of bins, things like that. These are things that you can look into later, but for right now we just want to do a size of bin. So this is basically the group size that we're grouping all the data by, and we're going to do 7 days to make it 1 week. So basically each of these data points, we have 1 point for every day. Now instead we're going to have 1 point either summed or averaged, whatever our aggregation style is, for a week basically. So if I click OK there, it's going to group our data together and it's going to be becoming a lot more smooth. We could group it by month instead to get it to smooth out a little bit more, but I think weekly production is fine, especially once we start filtering for the different oil wells. You'll see that it becomes a lot more smooth. Right now, it's a little bit more jagged still because we're showing the sum as opposed to the average for all of the oil wells together in that field, not for one particular one. We're actually showing all of them right now all together. So as I mentioned, we're showing the sum right now. What we want to do is change that to be the average. Instead of showing the total production in 1 week, we want to show the average production in 1 week. So we're going to change all of our values to use average instead. We'll change for oil volume, change for water volume, and for gas volume. We'll change all of those to be averages instead. And again, it's going to smooth out a little bit more since we're using average instead of summations. And now we want to actually rename our date produced axes. Since we're showing weekly data here now, we can rename this to weekly production. Something like that, something along those lines. So we have that axis labeled properly. Next thing is the visualization of our project. Right now we're showing like some bright colors on a white background, but we can actually change the way that this data is displayed and make it a little bit more appealing. So if we click on the View tab at the top, sorry, one moment. Yeah, if we click on the View tab at the top, we'll see a number of ways that we can actually change our view, the way that our data is presented. We can show different themes. This is the way that I like to change the way that the data is presented. I'm partial to the dark theme. It's called Innovate here, but you can scroll through and see the different types of themes. There's a theme gallery you can browse through that are available for ones that are created by the community. There's some fairly, innovative ones there as well. These are all fairly basic. I generally like this dark theme, so I'm going to choose that one. And it's going to change all the colors for our report. I find this one to be a little bit easier to read, at least for me. Okay, now next thing we're going to want to do is kind of customize the way that our data is showing up a little bit. You'll notice on the left-hand side we have oil volume and water volume. Those are the fields that we renamed, and we renamed gas volume. But gas volume is not showing up here. We just have these numbers. That's because the format for our line chart doesn't show that by default. So we're going to make a couple of changes in the format pane. So if we come over here under visualizations and we click format, there's a couple of things that we're going to want to change. First thing is under the secondary axis, which is the one which we have for gas volume. We're going to scroll down and toggle on title, and that's going to add gas volume in there. Excuse me, for our chart. The next thing that we're going to want to do is actually change the colors a little bit. Oil and gas volume right now are pretty close in color, and water volume is yellow. So we're going to change the colors. I think it makes more sense to me just visually for water volume to be one of the ones that's blue. So we can change whatever colors are showing up there. So I'm going to change the water one to be this blue, and then I'm going to change oil to maybe be this yellow color, and then I'm going to change gas to be maybe a green color. That way we can kind of, oil turned out brown. Let's make it yellow there. There we go. That way it kind of sticks out a little bit better. We have some more distinct colors there, as opposed to them all being sort of similar. So there's a lot of different aspects that you could play around with here for visualization, just to make them, but that's just to make things look pretty. That's not necessarily what we want to get into right now. But in any of these visualizations, you can play around with this format pane and see how you like the data to be presented. So now we have a really basic line chart showing up there. We have all of our data that we wanted to show there. But we want to add a couple of extra modules, let's say, for our data. Next, we want to add, let's say, we'll do downhole pressure. We can add a visualization for that here. Or, oh, sorry, actually, next thing we should add is a slicer so that we can be able to show a particular well instead of the average among all the wells. So we're going to come back to our Home tab, and then we're going to click on New Visual. And then we're going to come over to our Visualizations tab. since we're highlighted on this visual, it's going to change that one when we click on it, and we're going to click slicer. All right, and now that'll pop up down here, a field. Add data fields here. This is the field that we want to slice the data on, which is going to be our NPD well bore name, this column right here. I'm going to move that one into our data fields, and then you'll see that one auto-populated with our well bore names. And if I click on one, it will slice the data so that now we're only looking at data for that particular well bore, etc. And we can also unclick it so that we can see the average across all of them again. Okay, maybe I can stop for just a second to take some questions before we add the pressure one.
Yes, I had a question.
Sure.
Yeah. So I was wondering, is it possible to make it logarithmic? And if possible, I'm pretty sure it is.
Mm-hmm.
But if possible, can we add the minor grid lines?
Yeah, you can, absolutely. Like, for example, I believe that should be available in the format tab of the line chart. Let's see. Secondary lines should be, I think, in one of the axes columns. Let's see, I'm not sure. Those should be showing up somewhere in one of the options for the format. For each of the visualizations, they can sometimes show up in different places, but you can kind of play around in there and see like where it's showing up. It should be in one of these axes, I think. Not all, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it should be at the bottom. It's just the only problem that I'm having is adding minor grid lines for the logarithmic. So whenever you have the logarithmic data, you cannot do minor grid lines.
It's possible that you might not be able to do minor grid lines with logarithmic. Each of the visualizations is different, right? You could go to AppSource and try to find a custom visual that allowed you to do that. Like just look for like logarithmic scale line chart, something like that, and see if maybe there was one that allowed you to. But it's possible that if you have logarithmic, you might not be able to.
I see.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of exactly how all of the different visualizations play together, but in general you should be able to, but I guess for this one you might not be able to.
I see. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, no worries. Alrighty, let's go ahead and keep moving then, unless there was another quick question.
Yeah, I would like to know, is it possible to change the font size of all of this, like increase all of the font sizes at the same time, or I have to keep increasing for each axis or each label?
Typically you would change it through the format pane. That's kind of a pain though sometimes. Usually for certain filters, let's see if it does it for this one. No, it doesn't actually modify it automatically. For several of the different visualizations that are available, particularly the ones through AppSource, often they will have an auto scale for font size that you can change the amount that it auto scales for all of the different labels. For some of the built-in ones, though, that option is not available. I don't think. Let's see. Yeah, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it is, but yeah, for some of the other visualizations, you can modify them like automatically though.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other ones quickly before we move on to the pressure gauge? All right, let's go ahead and move on then. I'm going to rename our slicer also real quick. Well-born name, so it's easy to read up there. And then we're going to add a new visual. It's going to show up here. And then we can add our pressure gauge. So we want to show downhole pressure on our visualization. Let's say that's one of the requirements for our thing. We can click here on gauge, and then we can add our values in here for our actual value, minimum, maximum, and then target value for our gauge. And we want to find our downhole pressure, which should be here. So we're going to add our value for average value. And again, remember, we want to show averages here rather than sums. And then for minimum, we can show minimum. And for maximum, we can show maximum. And then for target value, for right now, we don't have a target value that we want to hit for pressure. We can actually just add that in as the average value again. And that'll add a little extra line for our gauge right at our average value. If we had, like, let's say there's a certain pressure that we wanted to keep as our average for the wells in our data set, then we could add that here, or we could actually just add it into our data set manually. But we don't have that currently, so we'll just make that the average. And this is okay, this little visualization here, this gauge. But what we want to do actually is look at some of the ones that are available on AppSource, because there are sometimes ones that look a little bit better, or that might be better for our visualization. This one's nice, but I do want to just show what you can do from AppSource as well. So if we click up here under More Visuals, and then do From AppSource, and we wait a moment while it loads, we can find our pressure gauge from there. Let's give it a minute. Maybe I can take a question while we're waiting if there was any more. Too slow. There it is, showing up finally. Oh, okay. There's a question in the chat. How did you get the min and maximum value? I'll import our new gauge real quick, and then I can get to that question. So when we're looking at AppSource, we can filter for the different types of visualizations, like some of the basic ones that are here, or we can search for one in particular if there's one that we know, or if we want to look at for example, if I want to look for map charts, things like that, I can search, and then it'll show all the different charts that are maps. Or I can click. There's actually one down here that says maps, but you get the idea. If I instead click on gauges, and I get rid of map, I can see the different gauges that are showing up. Let's go ahead and add this one. This dial gauge looks fairly nice, or we can add one of the other ones. You guys can kind of play around with them, but I'm going to go ahead and add this dial gauge to represent our pressure there. So import custom visual. The visual was successfully imported into this report, and now we'll see it showing up under our visualizations. And there's a special demarcation for custom visuals as opposed to the built-in visuals that are showing up in Power BI. So there was a question of how did I get min and max? When you look at the values here that we have imported for our visualization, the little drop-down button here shows what value we actually want to show, right? If I want to show the average, minimum, maximum, count, variance, whatever it is. For our value, we want to show the average, and then for our minimum value, that's interesting. We could actually make our target value the median, maybe, and see if that made a difference. Yeah, if we wanted the median to be our target, that could move where our gauge was. But basically, if you just click the little drop down, that's how you change how our aggregation is working right there. So to get the minimum value that shows up, I just click the little drop down and then click minimum. And same for maximum, average, and median. Okay, so we want to change this visualization, which we've already created, for the new one that we just imported. To do that, I click on the visualization, the little gauge we have, and then I click on the dial gauge, the new one we just imported. Okay, and you'll notice when I first import it, it doesn't seem to make much sense because of the way that the values have been changed for this custom one versus the built-in Power BI one. That's because of where it chose to put our target. It chose to put it in target start, which seems to make sense, except that for this visualization, where our pointer goes, which would be the gauge, is actually here under pointer value. So if I click on our median one and I drag it down to pointer value instead, now we see that it reflects more accurately the data that we actually wanted to show. And the other thing is this number that's showing up here. This is actually the title, or sorry, the name of the chart, and we can remove that from our format pane. If I come over to format and then drop down under chart name, I can turn that off, and then that'll remove that little name that's showing up there. Alrighty, and then we can rename these just like we did before. We can rename this one to min, rename this one to max. And then we can rename this one to average. Or actually, this is just the chart name. This should be pressure. We should name this the chart name as pressure. And then our pointer value is the average. And let's rename it to reflect that. Oh, I renamed the chart on accident. There we go. Oh, okay. I duplicated this one, that's why. So if I remove my pointer value and then re-add it from here, and then change this one to be average, and this one to be, it doesn't matter for this one because it's just the name that we're using there. We can make that count. I can rename that one to be pressure, and this one to be average. There we go. So now we have our title showing up the way we want. You can, of course, also just manually edit the title. Right now it's showing pressure, min, max, and average for that visualization, but we can modify that manually through our format pane as well. There's no need to go through and manually rename all these. We can also go to our format pane and then go down under title and center it as well, like that, so it looks a little nicer. But yeah, there you go. And then I wanted to add a bar chart for temperature as well. The process for that will be quite similar to how we did for the line chart, except we'll only be using one axis, which is for the temperature, as opposed to two different axes. But I think we have run out of time here. I think we're coming up to the end of our time slot. So I guess we'll go ahead and leave it there. Thanks everyone for joining. I don't know if we want to do a sign off there, if there were any final questions maybe, or we want to do like something like that. Any final questions? Okay, if not, then I think that's where we're going to go ahead and leave it. Thanks everyone for joining for the workshop. Thanks for having us. I think we had a lot of stuff to cover. This is still just scratching the surface, though, of what's possible with Power BI. There's a lot of good resources available on the Microsoft website as well that you can look into for some more in-depth stuff. But this is the basics of how you would start getting started with visualization and data manipulation in Power BI. It's a lot more that you can do. You can also publish these reports so they show up online, things like that. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Trevor.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you so much for the walkthrough. It was an excellent walkthrough to get us all started on this. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Alejandra.
If I can crack a very bad joke because it's a Friday evening, we work with Matplotlib a lot because we work with Python. So can I say that this is more like, let's say Matplotlib went to meet Panda's parents? So, you know, got dressed up, got self a user interface and, you know, all these customizable things right there without actually coding it. So that's really great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if there are no further questions, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'll let Trevor and Alejandra go. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to any one of us in the committee, and we'll get you connected with Trevor or Alejandra. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.